The 13th century world, an era when across the lands of Asia, a storm had already risen, a storm that had turned great cities and mighty empires into dust. That storm was the storm of the Mongols. And the leader of that storm was the man whom the world knows as Genghis Khan. Before his sword, great empires had fallen one after another. But even in that dark age, one name still stood as a symbol of resistance. A commander who refused to bow even after defeat. That man was Sultan Jalal ad-Din Khwarazm Shah. And today's story is about that very moment when two of history's greatest rivals stood face to face. On one side, the most terrifying conqueror of the world, and on the other, a warrior who had the courage to challenge even death itself. This was the moment when, before the raging waves of the Indus River, a decision was about to be made that would remain immortal in history forever. And then, what happened next astonished even Genghis Khan himself. Sultan Jalal ad-Din stood upon a high cliff on the banks of the Indus River. He turned back and looked behind him. The enemy was advancing toward him like an endless tide. Everywhere the roar of the Tatar army filled the air. And on the other side, the Indus River was raging in its full fury, its wild waves crashing against the mountains. The river surged so violently that merely imagining entering its waters was enough to make even the bravest warriors tremble. But there was no room for fear left in Sultan Jalal ad-Din's heart. He placed his trust in Allah and made his decision. He would leap into the river. The fierce fighting of the entire day had exhausted his horse, so he took a fresh mount. That horse was brave like a lion and swift like a leopard. Mounted upon it, Sultan Jalal ad-Din once again charged at the Tatars. The enemies who were engaged with his last remaining companions, the Sultan's sword fell upon them like lightning. Within moments, several Tatar soldiers lay writhing on the ground. Driving the enemy back, Sultan Jalal ad-Din turned his horse and reached the river's edge. This cliff was extremely high. Below, nearly 40 feet down, the waters of the Indus River crashed violently against the rocks. According to the chronicles of the Khwarazmian history, the depth of the river at that very point was nearly 180 feet, and beneath the water, sharp and terrifying rocks rose like hidden spears. Sultan Jalal ad-Din looked at his remaining companions and silently bid them farewell. Then he removed his armor and threw it away to lighten his weight. To shield himself from the arrows of the Tatars, he tied his shield to his back. He took hold of the royal standard, carried his spear and quiver, and then he struck his horse with the whip. On his lips was the name of Allah. And the very next moment, Sultan Jalal ad-Din Khwarazm Shah, together with his horse, fearlessly leapt from that terrifying height into the raging waves of the Indus River.
This was the moment that even Genghis Khan watched in utter astonishment. Amid the roaring waves, suddenly a thunderous splash echoed. The waters of the Indus River leapt several yards into the air. For a moment, Sultan Jalal ad-Din Khwarazm Shah completely disappeared within the raging crowd of waves. It seemed as if the stormy river had swallowed this great warrior into its depths. But the very next moment, tearing through the chest of the water, he emerged again. His loyal horse, fighting against the furious waves, was carrying its master toward the opposite bank of the river. The rebellious waves of the Indus kept swallowing the Sultan again and again. Every moment it felt as if the next wave would sweep him away with its violent current. The freezing cold of November, the icy waters of the river, his exhausted body, covered with wounds and scratches, was passing through unbearable agony. Yet Sultan Jalal ad-Din displayed such determination that even bravery itself would feel humbled before it. He kept control of his senses, gathered the last of his remaining strength, and clung to the horse's neck as if it were his final hope of life. The loyal horse sometimes cut through the waves and moved toward the shore, and sometimes a rebellious surge pushed it back again. Then, suddenly, a powerful wave rose that completely covered them both. For a moment, nothing could be seen except water. But when the wave passed, the Sultan saw the shore was now very close. For one final time, he gathered all his strength, and within a few moments, Sultan Jalal ad-Din Khwarazm Shah successfully reached the eastern bank of the Indus River.
This scene, for everyone present on the battlefield, was simply unbelievable. Genghis Khan had already given the order that the Sultan must be captured alive at any cost. To fulfill that command, when he saw that the Sultan was about to leap from the high cliff into the river, he struck his horse with the whip and rushed toward that direction with lightning speed. His sons and the Mongol commanders were racing behind him. But by the time Genghis Khan reached the riverbank, Sultan Jalal ad-Din had already leaped into the depths of the river. Seeing this sight, Genghis Khan stood completely motionless for a few moments. In astonishment, he placed his hand over his mouth. Perhaps he could not believe his own eyes. His sons and the Mongol generals stood there in stunned silence. Before them was a sight they had probably never witnessed in their lives. Later, the court historian of Genghis Khan, Atta Malik Juvaini, wrote these words about this astonishing bravery. On this earth, such a young warrior has never been seen, nor has anyone heard of such courage among the great heroes of the past. After a while, Genghis Khan looked across the river, and then his eyes saw a sight that was difficult to believe. Sultan Jalal ad-Din Khwarazm Shah was standing safely on the opposite bank of the Indus River. From head to toe, he was soaked in water. But on his face, there was still the same dignity, the same determination. The Sultan dismounted his horse. He removed his soaked tunic, took the saddle off the horse's back, and pulled out the felt pad beneath it. Then he removed arrows from his quiver and spread them upon the ground. All these things he laid out under the fading yellow light of the setting yellow sun so they could dry. This scene was like a declaration that this man was still undefeated. Then the Sultan planted his spear into the ground and hung the royal standard upon it. It was the gesture of a conqueror. Now the warrior raised his head and looked across the river toward his greatest enemy, Genghis Khan, the very man whose name made cities and villages tremble. The Sultan saw him staring helplessly from the other side, and suddenly a loud laugh burst from his lips. This was no ordinary laughter. It was the victorious laughter of a warrior, a laughter that even a tyrant accustomed to the screams and sighs of the oppressed could not endure. That laughter was like a burning arrow piercing the heart of Genghis Khan. At that moment, two of history's greatest rivals stood face to face. But this was not a battle of swords. There, in the battlefield, steel clashed with steel. Here, only their eyes collided. There, iron struck iron, but here, hearts were colliding with hearts. Both men could see each other clearly, and both were reading the history written upon each other's faces. In that moment, the Sultan's loud laughter was in truth a psychological victory. And on the other side, the helplessness of Genghis Khan was visible to all. His greatest enemy was standing only a few hundred steps away, yet he could not harm a single hair on his head. The rival he had chased across countless miles from the Amu Darya was now right before his eyes and still beyond his reach.
The conqueror of the world, even after winning the battle, felt the burden of defeat within his heart. For him now, returning from the battlefield as a victor held no meaning, because he knew leaders of such courage could raise fortresses from dust and armies from lifeless bodies whenever they wished. Genghis Khan stood silently watching the face of the Lion of Khwarezm. Lightning of determination seemed to flash across that face. The Indus River had drawn a boundary of death, and crossing it was a feat possible for only one man, Sultan Jalal ad-Din, Khwarazm Shah. A few moments later, the Sultan calmly sat down beneath his royal standard and began to rest. On the other side of the river, Genghis Khan was watching all this in amazement. His sons, Ogedei Khan and Chagatai Khan, were also staring with wide-opened eyes at this unbelievable scene. Finally, these words escaped from the lips of Genghis Khan. "A son should be like him. Blessed is the father whose son is so brave." Then he said, "A young man like him has never been born in this world and never will be." Paying tribute to his most dangerous enemy, he added, "It is astonishing that this man has escaped the destruction of both fire and water and reached the shore of safety." Then he looked at his sons and commanders and said, "Remember this man will become the cause of many troubles and countless rebellions for us in the future. We must never be careless about him." But this story does not end here. On the banks of the Indus River, this moment was not merely the end of a battle. It was in fact the beginning of a new struggle. Genghis Khan did return with his Mongol army, but in his heart a fear remained. He knew that the man who had defeated even the river of death could rise again at any moment and change the course of history. And indeed, Sultan Jalal ad-Din Khwarazm Shah was no longer just a defeated king. He had become the last hope of resistance against the Mongols. But the question was, what awaited him on the other side of the Indus River? Would he be able to gather a new army again? Would he once more stand against the storm of Genghis Khan? Or was history about to lead him into another severe trial? We will discover all this in the next part, where begins a new struggle of Sultan Jalal ad-Din Khwarazm Shah and a new chapter in the story of resistance against the Mongol Empire.